I go through my remarks today. But again, I want to thank the Embassy of India and the Consulate in Kolkata for having me here today. So one moment while I work to see if I can share my screen.
Michelle, while you were sharing your screen, I'll invite our moderator of the session to the stage, Poonam. Please come to the stage, and also the others in this panel, Swati Gautam, Moniza Islam, and Anisha Joshi. Please join Michelle virtually. Should we share your presentation from here, Michelle?
That would be fine. In Zoom, I'm not conducting the meeting, so it won't let me share my screen, but no problem.
Can you see the presentation?
Here we go.
Yeah.
And is that you, Ananya?
Yes, it's me. Really missing you.
What a pleasure. What a pleasure.
Okay. Hi.
Okay, so if you're ready there in Kolkata, we can go ahead and start. Does that sound good?
Sure. Hi, Michelle.
Okay, well, today, and as has mentioned, I currently work at the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition based in Washington, D.C. And we are a membership coalition from all across the country who dedicate our mission to America's global leadership. And we particularly support efforts to increase our diplomatic ties with other countries around the world and our focus on development assistance in creating relationships and building healthy and prosperous societies. And as mentioned, prior to this, I spent 4 years as the Assistant Administrator at the U.S. Agency for International Development. And many of you may know of USAID. And in that organization, we are the arm of the U.S. government that is dedicated to humanitarian and development assistance. And particularly, we are, again, looking to reduce poverty, to increase economic prosperity, health, education, truly making the world a better, more safer place. And a very strong focus, one that I have a lot of passion for, is women's empowerment. So gender empowerment and equality initiatives. And it was because of that, at my time at USAID, if we go to the next slide, I was involved in an initiative that I want to talk to you about today. I think that this initiative is a very good example, one that perhaps you in India could consider replicating. And so for those of you in the room today, if you work in the government, if you are in a NGO in civil society, if you are a woman activist, a woman entrepreneur, a woman in university, or someone who works in the private sector, there is a role for each of you in this initiative. And I'm going to briefly outline what the initiative was and what made it successful, and then I'd be happy to answer questions at the end. I know that you've spent time now under Ananya's good leadership talking about the situation in India, in your own country, and in Southeast Asia. I know you're focusing on Nepal and Bangladesh, and talking about the rates of women's workforce participation. When WGDP, the Women's Global Development and Prosperity Initiative, was launched, we had spent about a year looking at the statistics around the world of the gender disparities, right? So where women, specifically in the economic sector, how many women were in the formal workplace? How many women were graduating university but not going into the workforce? Were there as many women entrepreneurs as male entrepreneurs? Did they have access to the same capital, networks, etc.? And so it was because of that understanding that women faced such strong gender disparities in this economic sector, and the fact that we know that women's economic empowerment has a great impact on global prosperity, GDP, we decided to launch WGDP. So if we go to the next slide, WGDP for the United States was a very innovative initiative. And so I'm going to walk you through why. So as I mentioned, we spent almost a year and a half developing the initiative because we wanted this to be something that was sustainable. We wanted it something that had buy-in, particularly not only from the US government, but from private sector as well as civil society. So what made WGDP stand apart was the fact that it was actually a whole of US government effort. So we worked, at that time I was detailed to the White House, we worked with the 10 departments and agencies, such as Department of Labor, State Department, etc., to really look at how we were focusing our various efforts on empowering women economically. And we looked at where money was being spent. We looked at the types of programming being conducted. And most importantly, we looked to see how we were measuring impact. Based on that, several things happened. First, we decided it was important for all of the US government efforts to follow the same monitoring and evaluation framework. This is important, right? Because we needed to make sure we were all working towards the same goals. This was a large undertaking, as you can imagine, to get everyone on, if you will, that same page. We also recognized it was very important to have dedicated public sector funding. While each of the agencies was utilizing their own funding for these initiatives, we knew that if we had what we called at that time an incentive fund, which was a collective fund that allowed us very specifically to launch and scale new WGDP programs, we could really make an impact. And then, as I mentioned, it was very important for us that this not just be a US government initiative. We needed, as equal partners, the private sector as well as civil society to help us. And I will outline that as we go through. And finally, the program was developed to recognize we had to meet women where they are, right? So we really honed in on 2 levels. First, our pillar 1 really focused on women prospering in the workforce, bringing women into the workforce, helping them achieve leadership positions, to have equity in pay, in retention and promotion. Secondly, we recognized that women as entrepreneurs also faced additional challenges. And finally, we realized our overarching issue facing us was that if we did not change regulatory and legal frameworks, many of our initiatives would not be able to be sustainable. So if we go to the next slide, I'm going to walk you now through these 3 pillars. You've spent a lot of time talking about the challenges. You know the challenges well, and so we won't spend a lot of time on that. But this really recognized what were the unique challenges facing women when they wanted to enter, remain or advance in the workplace. And when we worked with civil society and the private sector on charting these challenges, it led us to our goal under this pillar, which was that we needed to increase women's global labor participation and advancement. And we would do that through providing education, training, and support. So if we go to the next slide, I'll walk you through some of those solutions. So we dedicated our efforts to several areas. First, we realized that many of the fastest growing industries, of course, are in the tech field. But we also realized there are less women, as you know, than men in STEM educational programs. And so we really focused efforts on increasing the number of girls and women who had training opportunities in STEM. Some of these were vocational, where they weren't maybe long-term education, but we could provide vocational certificates to women who might otherwise not be able to do, let's say, a bachelor's or master's higher education degree. We also recognized that there were women in the workforce who were really feeling stagnant. They would feel like they didn't have the same opportunities as men to advance. And so we created leadership training opportunities for the women, but we also recognized that it wasn't the women's lack of ability to advance. It was oftentimes the situation and the enabling environment they found themselves in. So we worked very closely with private sector companies and their leadership to look at where the gaps were in women's promotion and pay, and to help them address those inequalities so women had the same opportunities as men. Another issue you all know too well is that we had to understand what were the reasons women might be faced that would make them reluctant or unable to join the formal or labor force. And as you know, in many countries around the world, we recognize that often it was unsafe, right? So it was either unsafe for women to travel back and forth from work, or workforce gender-based violence and sexual harassment was profound, or there may not be the correct or the appropriate sanitary or hygiene facilities for women that would allow them the safety and the privacy they needed. And so those were areas we had to address. Finally, we focused on women's access to digital tools. As you all know, there's a huge gender discrepancy in the amount of women who have access to internet and to ICT. We recognized that it was going to be very foundational for women, one, to be able to have this to help them get skills training, to help them access their own financing, and three, to be able to create networks that would be important for either finding job opportunities or, in the case of entrepreneurs, to connect to networks. So one of the program examples launched under the WGDP, the Women's Global Development and Prosperity Initiative, was what we called at USAID Women Connect. Women Connect was a new initiative that, together with the private sector, we sought to bring more women into the digital economy and to give women access to digital tools. This looked very different in the countries. There were 40 countries where we piloted interventions, and then after the first year, we decided where we could scale up successful interventions. An overarching part of this Women Connect program was making sure, first of all, women were safe online. Two, making sure that women had the digital training and skills to know how to find the information they sought. And three, to provide access to mobile banking. And in this picture you see, this was one of our program partners in the Dominican Republic who was working on a program to utilize digital access to create new methods for women to have credit scores that would allow them to access financing. So going to our next pillar, as mentioned earlier, in our next slide, please. We recognize that there were specific gaps that women who maybe already had created enterprises, such as small, medium enterprises, or women who just wanted to break in and become an entrepreneur were facing. You know these well, right? It's an access to credit. It's an access to markets, specifically global markets. And again, those digital services, those networks with buyers. And then overarching all, of course, were those systemic barriers, such as women being unable to access credit without a male signatory. Women not having traditional collateral to be used to access credit. So in that year plus where we worked with women, NGOs and private sector, we realized our goal under Pillar 2 was to be able to ensure women entrepreneurs, women business owners, they were able to access finance, market opportunities, and trainings to establish and grow their businesses. And if we go to the next slide, please, we'll talk a little bit about how we did that. First, we really needed to understand what the barriers to women accessing capital were and to create that. This created a very deep focus on reform in finance and lending practices. So as I mentioned earlier, working with countries, working with the financial sector to allow women to access financing at the same interest rates as men, sometimes less if we could provide new opportunities and de-risk those opportunities. We also created opportunities where we could connect them to global buyers. One of my, there's several program examples here, and one of my favorite, and I think Ananya has introduced you to the We Connect initiative, was this wonderful organization called We Connect, which I know is very active in your region, which sought to bring in private sector buyers with global supply chains. So you can think, PepsiCo, Walmart, Exxon, and create an online portal where women entrepreneurs and business owners could directly connect with these global firms who wanted to source from women, businesses, and entrepreneurs, and to allow them that direct access to create this matchup where the women could advertise and sell their products. Another thing we really worked on was women mentorship. So women entrepreneurs who had been successful in addressing many of these barriers and creating global networks were able to come in and work with and train new and rising entrepreneurs. Another great example here is through the Development Finance Corporation, which was launched in 2019 in the United States. DFC is our private overseas investment arm of the U.S. government. And DFC created what they called the 2X Women's Initiative, which made sure that they had a gender lens in all of their overseas investments. In fact, today, 49% of all DFC investments go to women-owned or controlled businesses. DFX was really important here because, as we mentioned, oftentimes women needed that collateral or another entity to sign to take the risk, so a financial lender would lend to regulatory and legal frameworks that systemically created opportunities that barred women from having gender equity and equality in women's economic empowerment. And so through this final pillar, it was really one of our very important efforts to work across the world, again, government to government. So the US government working with our bilateral partners and countries around the world to say we need to work together to create an enabling environment that really supports and promotes women. And so when we looked at all of these challenges, right, we recognized there were often 5 foundational areas where we needed reform in order for women to actually be able to be economically empowered. And so our goal here was an enabling environment that reduced those barriers, right? It enhanced protections in policies, in laws, in regulations, and practices to facilitate women's participation. We also recognize that while legal frameworks in the public sector were important, oftentimes it was enabling frameworks in the private sector that were challenging or debilitating to women. And so the private sector also had to change many of their frameworks. So if we go to the next slide, we began to look at what the solutions were, and we realized, first and foremost, we had to remove the restrictive legal, so the area the government could handle, regulatory, oftentimes in the private sector, and then also recognizing there were oftentimes cultural barriers that underlined all of these issues, such as, for example, maybe women not being registered at birth and not having ID, women not being able to travel freely, again, access credit, etc. And so we created action plans in each of our government agencies and departments of how we could uniquely enhance these, removing these barriers. So one example I'll give you here is the Millennium Challenge Corporation, which is an independent agency of the US government. They worked in the government of Morocco to reform land rights, specifically for women in the communal and pastoral areas. As you know, in many areas, right, women don't have oftentimes they're not leaseholders, but we found in some of the informal sectors, even when women were farmers or pastoral herders, there weren't opportunities for them to really claim the land or the herds. And so we worked to reform, along with the government of Morocco, how women in those communities could have title and ownership over their cattle, over either their herds and over those pastoral lands. In Pakistan, we worked in 1 year alone to make sure that over 1 million women and girls finally had national ID cards, which of course, as you know, unlocked their opportunity in every field, from education to traveling to the economy. And this was really important. And then we worked really specifically with companies. And one example I'll give here is one we called engendering utilities. And this is when we looked at, in many countries, the largest high growth wage and employment sectors were the public utilities. Some were privatized, but many in the countries we were working with were not. And so what we did was we would go in and we would work with the owners or the leaders of these utility companies, you know, from gas to electric to water. And we would look at basically what we would call their human resources and say, you know, let's do an assessment of how many women versus men you have here, and really find out why there are less women and why they're not being promoted. And let's change those institutional barriers. So we looked at making sure that there were proper sanitary conditions for women, and that there was, separate toilets. We made sure that if it was dangerous for women at night because of crime in the area or sexual harassment or violence, that we had opportunities for women to be escorted home, or for companies to provide transportation options for women to get to and from work safely. We also understood that oftentimes women needed a nursery, right? Maybe they couldn't be in the labor force because they had, of course, small children or babies at home and no one to take care of them. So we looked at opportunities for companies to provide these nurseries for women and their babies to have a safe place to bring them. We also looked at making sure that, again, there were laws that prohibited sexual harassment and violence in the workplace. All of these together would be able to create an enabling environment, of course, for women to feel safe at work and to have opportunities. And finally, we created pathways to success for women within companies. Sometimes these were internships to allow young women who came out of university an opportunity to get there, as we would say, entry-level experience. Other times, it was a management track where we had transparent opportunities for women and men to understand how to accede into a management position and to make sure the process was fair. That everyone had to follow a series of steps, and those that completed them successfully could be promoted. And so it was very much a holistic effort. And so to go to the last slide, because I do want to have opportunity if you have questions here. WGDP was very successful. In the beginning, when we launched, we said, we hope in 5 years that we will be able to positively impact 50 million women in the developing world by 2025. By year 2, we had already exceeded that goal by reaching half of the numbers. So by year 2 already, we had reached 25 million women. And again, that was using very rigorous evaluation methods to make sure that women had solid evidence that they were making gains. And so, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. And so that was something very important, right? That rigorous monitoring and evaluation. The second thing, as I have mentioned throughout, was we needed to recognize as the government that we played an important role, right? One, in helping remove legal barriers, but two, it was really bringing in private sector and civil society partners. One of the things we could do as the public sector, right, is help catalyze financing. And so that dedicated financing was so important. But we also needed to be a convener. We needed to bring in private sector and NGO partners, recognizing that we were going to have women successful in the labor workforce. We needed private sector enterprises to be part of the solution. And of course, the NGOs are so foundational to any success of any program. We needed NGOs that advocated for women, right? That either, helped advocate for women's inequality, that advocated for how to better do a job to keep women safe, how to empower women, and how to really make sure women had an equal footing. We needed those partners, specifically partners in the countries where we were working. Also, it was that focus on the enabling environment I just spoke about under Pillar 3. We recognized that if we wanted these to be long-term, sustainable changes, we needed to change the enabling environments. And finally, it was really important for us to meet women where they were at. As you know, anyone in this room, when you're focusing on challenges and solutions, you really have to be very articulate in deciding what particular challenges are you going to face. While in an organization like USAID, where I had a leadership position, we focused on all aspects of gender empowerment and equality. We knew in WGDP we had to be very specific, and so we decided what we were really going to focus on is women's barriers in the economic, again, sphere. So labor force and entrepreneurs. We then recognized that women were at different phases of their career. And so we would have to make sure we had multi-tiered programming that could work for women right out of university, or even women who didn't have secondary or higher education, to provide them with the training they needed to be able to be engaged in particularly these higher wage sectors. We also recognize women entrepreneurs, as I said, had very specific challenges they were facing, and that we needed to address those. And so programming had to be very holistic. It had to look at all of the challenges, all of the areas where women were, and the different unique areas in life and leadership women were. So I will wrap up, if we go to the last slide, I will wrap up my presentation here so that as when Nanya is ready, we can do a question and answer. But this, I hope, gives you an example, no matter what sector today you represent. I think this is a blueprint that can be replicated by other countries outside of the United States. I know other countries have looked at it. And really what it takes is a collective unity and will, which already many private sector, many governments, many NGOs have, but it really takes a concerted effort to bring the partners together and to really from day one create something where you're all equal stakeholders in the initiative. So let me stop there and thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Michelle, for that sharing that framework, which I'm sure must have triggered numerous initiatives at the ground level all over the globe, including in South Asia. I know we are lagging a little bit behind in introductions, so I am Poonam, and you'll be happy to know I lead We Connect International's initiative in India, which
okay.
is absolutely great to have you here with us digitally. And I have with me an absolutely inspiring panel here, and I'm going to just quickly introduce them while the audiences can, think of some questions for Michelle. I have with me joining us, Michelle, with you, is Swati Gautam, who is the founder of a laundry brand called Necessity. I also have Moniza Islam. She's the head of communications and gender focal point at Mir Group, Bangladesh. And I have Miss Anisha Joshi, who is a managing director of a furniture design group called Contour Furniture Systems, who are going to join in this panel. And before I, take this opportunity to ask them their journey, if anybody has any questions for Michelle on her presentation and on the framework, guys, here's your moment.
Poonam, let me go ahead. Hi Michelle, this is Swati here. I'm the woman who makes bras. So my question to you is this. In these few years, so it must have been maybe 5-6 years since President Trump launched it, and Biden is now about to go in for a re-election. So I'm presuming it's 5-6 years of your work. Can you give us some real-life illustration of the challenges you faced in implementing your wonderful program?
Oh, thank you for that. So, as you mentioned, so this was started in 2018, and at that time, it was President Trump, and he really gave us the go-ahead and said, this is important, let's launch this. And it was because we had the President of the United States saying, this is something important. First of all, it really made a difference, as you can imagine, because then our departments, our agencies, everyone said, okay, right, the president has said this, we must do it. When President Biden was elected then in 2020, of course, our aim was that this could be, as you know, in India, right, not something, because we have a very strong political system, our parties are very strong. We wanted it to be something that wasn't just one party, let's say the Republican Party under President Trump. We wanted it to last. We wanted it to be bipartisan and say, this isn't about American politics. this is about really good for women around the world. So when President Biden came in, I myself talked to many of the officials I knew that would come in to take my place and others to talk about the program and to, you know, advocate for why it worked, how it worked, and for it to continue. And I will say that, I will say this, that can be a challenge in any political system, right? If it has started in one administration, how do you make sure it carries through? And so that was important for us to have a bipartisan approach, both when we launched it and when the new president came in. And I'm pleased to say that when the Democratic Party came in and President Biden, they had many of the same goals. And while some things changed and evolved, the essence of this framework still exists. Some programs have different names, but there continues to be dedicated funding and leadership. And so it's been able to, if you will, survive the test of time. That's very hard to do, as you know, in many partisan settings, but really shows goodwill. The other challenges, I'll be candid, are that we had to recognize, as the U.S. government, right, we are never in a position to tell, let's say, government of India, government of Bangladesh, right, you have to change your laws. That it is not, you know, in a building we can, you know, say you have to do it. And so one of the challenges we had is really increasing our diplomatic conversations. Because that enabling environment was so important, the biggest challenge was for us to government say, this is why it's important for you. And it's not just about women. It's about your entire society. So if you're skeptical of making changes to these laws, here's why you shouldn't be, right? And it took I spent a lot of time having those conversations. The other challenges specifically that we faced were that access to credit. Well, we knew it was a problem. You as an entrepreneur will know. We also couldn't just go to banks and say, you have to give women credit. I think one of the biggest challenges I saw early on was that unlocking access to credit was going to take the longest of the reforms. Because we literally had to change financial systems in place. You know this, right? I mean, and so if your financial, even a global financial system says your debt income ratio has to be this, you need to have this much collateral, and women simply didn't have that, we couldn't change that overnight. And so while we were able to make great gains, that is an ongoing effort. And then lastly, something you know all, I would say the final challenge I would say is being sensitive to social and cultural barriers. And again, as the United States, right, I had to be very careful. And I had spent 12 years prior to USAID working in an international organization called IRI, and for part of that I lived in Southeast Asia. I learned a great deal about how to work with local advocates to really be the voice for their communities. As an American woman coming in, I had to really work with local partners to understand what were the cultural reasons behind sometimes some of these strictures. And how did we work in those communities? Some countries I worked, it was tribal communities, again, the pastoral communities, and otherwise to help take away some of those barriers that were really unfair and really seemed not to be documented anywhere, especially I would say in some of the religious communities, but had become practices. And that took a lot of dialogue and a lot of local buy-in, because it had to be something where those societies saw that as something that, again, you know, was something important to them. So there's work yet to be done, but I'm proud that WGDP continues to advance, and then it continues to make an impact. And in fact, I'm happy to send, that could be emailed, more information afterwards of where you can see the various programs. But I hope that answers your question, but those are the three biggest challenges.
Indeed it does. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Anyone else? Any question for Michelle? Michelle, I'd like to ask you, somewhere in your presentation talked about data and how
Yes.
important is it to have data in all these areas, which is absolutely lacking right now. So could you just share some thoughts on that, and whether the availability of data is now are there any tools which were used during the intervention, and what is planned for that?
That's a great question. So the data was really important. One of the opportunities we had was that the US government had been collecting sex disaggregated data in many of our programmatic areas and had communities of practice looking at this. So we were able to build on that foundation and say, well, USAID has this data. And so, for example, we had a lot of data on women's fintech, access to financial technology. But then we realized our Department of Labor had a lot of data on women's workforce participation numbers. So the first thing we did was we literally would come together, we would meet quite regularly, we would have to have a representative from each department agency, and we would say, here's the data we collect. Everyone would compile that data. Using that, and again, I'm happy to send this monitoring and evaluation framework, we came up with standard indicators now that all of the agencies had to use. Because while we were oftentimes collecting some of the same data, as you will appreciate, it wasn't unanimous. And sometimes we defined it differently, and that was not helpful. So now, at least, the US government has standard data. The other thing, and to your point, we really looked at is making data a signature part specifically of Pillar 1. And so as I mentioned, we recognized that data was going to be very important for us. First of all, to understand where the challenges were. But that financial or that technology sector was also going to unlock a lot of doors and opportunities for women. So some of the earliest interventions we funded under Women Connect, under that digital access, was providing women grants to actually conduct data research. So as I showed you the picture from our colleague in the Dominican Republic, she went around and collected data on what type of, let's say, to do a new type of collateral and credit scoring. So to allow women outside of traditional lending, she would collect data and then create new credit scoring. So we could go to banks or financial institutions and show them that we had a new model to show risk. So data is so important. If you do not have the data, I feel strongly to say these programs will not be successful, but you need to have uniform data.
Thank you for that, Michelle. And I'm now going to, pass this floor to our other, panelists. We have talked about from so much content since the morning, but the best is yet to come, guys. And we have with us some phenomenal success stories here. And I'm going to shoot straight. I know we are a bit stressed on time, but I'm going to ask Swati first this question. Swati, lingerie brand, I just am curious, how did you identify the niche? And what was your story? We heard TAM just a while back about target markets. So could you tell us about what is your story and where this idea came from, and how did you identify this niche?
So hi everybody. I come from a time when the terminology, when the English used to communicate was not so difficult, when an ecosystem was a community, when there was no TAM. So I've been working now for 33 years plus. Life was simple then. to condense the story of 33 years, I come from a service class family, and I'm a graduate of St. Xavier's College next door in political science. I think it helped me navigate a lot of things because it taught me what to focus on and what not to focus on, basically. That was the good point of that. Later, I did do a master's too, much later in life, whilst the business was continuing in broadcasting from the University of Sheffield. But in between, what is it that happened? So family circumstances forced me to opt for self-employment for some time. I wasn't able to pursue a master's right after my first degree, or I perhaps would have gone into further education and taken the management route. I would say at absolutely the beginning of this, let me tell you very clearly, I owe none of my success to myself. And I repeat it for this group of women leaders, 33 years of experience, 53 years of age. This is not my success. Destiny has given me what it's given me because I've seen a lot more women who worked harder and with more focus. I say it today that at age 14, if you believe in destiny, you're a fool. And at 40, if you don't believe in destiny, then you're a fool. Right?
Thank you.
No, that's a fact. That's a fact. So to cut to the chase, here I was, a bright young graduate full of life, staying at home, and I see this little advertisement. Those were the days of the print media. Please don't forget, 33 years back, right? It says that it wants fabricators to manufacture for their bra brand. Okay? Now, I'm going to be quickly interweaving my story as an example to identifying a niche. Now, the first thing to identify a niche is to identify a pain point that you have faced. So if you faced it, you ask around and others are also facing it. So when I was young, 33 years back, growing up in a middle class family, the daughter of a bureaucrat, where did you get your bras? Your mother took you to Lake Market or to Newmarket, stood you in front of a guy who looked at you and said, "Chautirish." And he gave you chautirish. And if you came back home and told your mom, now moms those days were very different, that this doesn't fit me, she would give you a chautirish slap and say, "This is what you will wear for 1 year, you chose it, you better not complain." So there was this thing that all of us faced it. Any middle class, service class girl faced it. It's different for the business class. I am now somewhat overlapping with the business class, so I can see they are Mars and we are Venus, or vice versa. So that was a pain point, and then came this advertisement, and for certain personal reasons I was at home. So I went out, met those people, and now the second thing in identifying a niche, the first was a pain point. The second is, do what you like to do if possible. If life gives you the luxury of doing what you want to do, it will be easier for you. Now, service class family, after class 10, CBSE board, Kendriya Vidyalaya, you have a 4-month break. And your mother, what does a nice middle class mom do? She puts you into Usha sewing school. You don't waste your time. I mean, you start doing your class 11 studies. I mean, that's exactly how we were brought up. I mean, those were super helicopter moms without having the qualifications of being helicopter moms. So sewing, very interested. The interest in sewing multiplied because you go to St. Xavier's, a very, very, very privileged institution where girls are wearing new stuff every day, and you ask yourself that this is the budget that your dad can give you. You can either buy 3 sets in this, or you can buy the fabric worth 9 sets and stitch it yourself. So there you go. I enjoyed being a seamstress at home. There was also this pain point about bras. So this advertisement somehow made sense, but I keep on repeating that it is the universe that leads us to where we're going. I met these guys. They were the number 3 in India in terms of volume. They were by far the largest in Eastern India. It was a brand called Bell. Okay, and you see all of you nodding your head. They used to have huge marketing campaigns, mass campaigns, okay? And so I started fabricating for them. I set up a unit at home in a room, started making for them, and we trundled on. 2 years later, Bell defaulted heavily, super heavily on, I'm sorry, I'm locking your door. I'm so sorry. So Bell defaulted heavily on their advertising company. Then they were called advertising. Now fancier name is marketing communication. So with time, everything has become more complex. Okay? So their advertising company was a company called HTA, which is no more, Hindustan Thompson Limited, right? Associates. So Bell owed them a humongous amount of money, and HTA said, out you go. And an All India Association of Advertisers said, nobody's going to service Bell anymore. Bell wound up. 2 years later, we were where we were, myself and a group of women who were my team. We decided to do what Bell was doing. Poonam, let me be honest. I don't think any young person can identify a niche and say, oh, hello, I will be there 20 years later. Whoever does it is a genius. I haven't met geniuses. I am not a genius. All you do is have little goalposts. Right. 2 years, 5 years, okay? And the third thing in identifying a niche is, if you're passionate about something, you will find it. Good. I am passionate about bras. I am passionate even before that about being self-employed, because I know what it brings to the table. Self-employment for a woman is absolute freedom. I have the freedom to design my life around my heart and my uterus and my bank balance. That is something I wanted to do, okay? So the third thing is I was passionate about bras and self-employment. My service class family naturally, so this is 31 years back, said, hello, you go back to academics. So I said, yes, going back, sat for what was called the CAT, the Common Aptitude Test for Management, and decided to do what Bell was doing. That is all I could think of. And I was all of 22 years old. So we started supplying to all these small stores throughout South Calcutta, okay? And of course I sat for CAT. And of course, fortunately or unfortunately, I do not know, I did get through. But then the universe intervened. So when they interviewed me at the Joka campus, a gentleman on board turned out to be the husband of one of my professors from St. Xavier's College. And those were the days. An absolutely sterling man, he's no more, and when he passed away, the Guardian, the broadsheet Guardian, Ramchandra Guha wrote half a page of an obituary for that man. That was the personality of that man. He called me home. He told me after the interview was over, he said, you come home and meet me. I said, okay sir, I'll come. So I went because my man was already there, his wife. He told me, I believe you've been making bras for 3 years. I said, yes sir. He said, do not join this course. Give yourself 2 years. If you've got through this year, you'll get through again if you want to, and if you work hard. But I remember that evening, I learned this new term. He said, how can I forget it now? This is age. He said there was the learning curve. Your learning curve has now come to a point where you have gone through your most difficult phase, and you will soon be much happier than a person who's working for somebody else. So I continued working for myself. My parents were extremely, there was Mahabharata at home, but never mind. If you want to be a leader, you have to first start at home and quietly or not put up with it. So we started supplying to these smaller stores where 100% credit you had to supply on credit. And it was not just credit for that consignment alone. The norm was this. You supplied thrice and then you would get paid for the first bill. That was not an easy situation for a girl with no capital, right? Very quickly, what happens next is the Calcutta Municipal Corporation, the local body, decides that all hawkers, Shubhruto Mukherjee was then the mayor of Calcutta, the old timers will remember. He said that there'll be Operation Sunshine and we are going to remove all the hawkers. So that model also failed. So the first model as a fabricator failed. The second model as a manufacturer of your own brand failed. But then if you want to be passionate about what you're doing, and if you don't want to do it only because you want to sell it to someone someday, then you'll be able to have your feet on ground. The third model was simply this. A lady called me up. She said, I'm a partner at PwC. I need to meet you. I believe you make innerwear. I said, yes, ma'am, I do. She came over. She said, will you customize it to my size? And I knew here was an opportunity. So there's a lot to thank for. There's the universe to thank for. Slowly, I started at home. We ended up having workshops. We ended up having our own chain of stores, one after the other. And so here I am.
Amazing. Thank you. Also a story of grabbing the opportunity, finding the opportunity when you see it, identifying it. That's a great, thank you so much for that, Swati. And now now we have the niche, the idea and everything, and now comes the brand building. And we have a communications expert with us in Moniza Islam. Moniza, I have a question to you is, brand building, what are the tools you would suggest here? Why is it so important? And what are the digital tools and other tools you'd like to suggest on that?
Hello everyone, thank you for giving me the opportunity. First of all, I want to clear that what is brand. It's a perception of your product, of you to your audience or your customers. So today's session, I hear a lot of ideas about the business, about women empowerment, and how they start the business. But if you want to establish a long-term business, you need to create your own brand, and you need to find out the USP of your product and promote them. So when I start working in brand and marketing, in our country, the women are not used to work in marketing. And the perception was that women are only working administrative work, and all men are doing the marketing job because you need to go outside, you need to go market research. So I started my career as a brand officer before, it's like 12 years ago. So I built lots of food brands in corporate sectors, then electronics brand, then now I am in construction industry, like trees, culvert, roads. So you can build different type of service or product, or you can do your personal branding. So when you give a unique name or unique logos, or you can tell your story to your customers. So you can create your own story and you can promote them to your targeted audience. So these days, the digital tools, what you say, is very important. So how can you build a brand through digitally? So lots of work, lots of different techniques and trainings, and you can find in your website and also YouTube, and also you can Google Garage, who deliver you the free content to learn how you enlisted your company name or enlisted your business in the Google, and also Facebook offers different kind of free lessons, how you incorporate or how you run your product or your company identity through Facebook. So lots of opportunity you can explore through digitally. Also for South Asian, in our country, lots of women entrepreneurs build a community, like they create their own pages through Facebook. They promote their own product, they promote each other services and product, and give different reviews and help them to sell to the others. So that's also very important.
Sure. Thank you for that. And yes, digital tools are becoming a key marketing strategy used in these days with Instagrams. I've seen a lot of businesses who start with Instagram and are doing really, really well. So definitely very important. Thank you so much. And now I have a question for Anisha, who started, as a, I think she was telling me she was 22 when she started the journey, and at a very small scale, and she's a renowned name today and a very large organization. So Anisha, tell us about your scaling up, journey with a focus on the scaling up landscape.
So, good evening everyone, Anisha. So, I'll just tell you a little bit briefly about myself. So, I started, I studied around some 8 schools, stayed in 10, 12 cities, and believe me, each one of this has helped me change my perception and to scale up, of course. So, I got married quite young, I was 23. I have 2 kids, that's a little bit about myself. And from the professional front, I started, and I do not, by the way, when I took on, I did a BCom Honours from Lady Shri Ram College, and then moved back to Calcutta at that point in time. I wanted to get into the corporate world, which is what my family was all about. We were all, everyone was a professional, and I'm a first generation entrepreneur. So no one really thought that business or trying to be self-employed is something which is there in our genes. But as luck would have it, I did not clear CAT, and I thought I was quite a cat, and the only thing I deserved was the IIM. And because I didn't make it in the first round, and it just so happened that I had an aunt who dropped by and told my mother that क्या करेगी, corporate world में जाके आगे तो बच्चे संभालने हैं, बड़ी मुश्किल होती है. Why don't you, she was starting an interior design firm at that time, and she said that why don't you make her join me, and she can just learn and pick up from me. I thought this was like a job offer, and when I went there the first month, I realized that I was given 400 rupees, by the way, which just about covered the metro fare from Theatre Road till SP Mukherjee Road, where I was getting off. And then I realized that I was actually being trained, which was wonderful. And on the side, I did an interior design course as well. So I trained with her for 4 years, and then decided that I think it was about time that I started off by myself. So I had a couple of initial lucky breaks. I was sharing with Poonam here that HLL, as it was then called, I did an office. So I was trained for is corporate interiors, is what I was taught. And so I did an office for Dabur, I did an office for Hewlett Packard, and that is when this HLL, it was just luck by chance, I would say, came by, and we did their whole huge office at Theatre Road for them. And initially it was just a one-man organization. So I was all alone, and I started from the house, and my husband by then had moved to Darjeeling, and I would do back and forth. I mean, the kind of things which I sometimes look back, I feel that had it been today, I don't think I would be able to do it, and I don't think we brought up our children in such a way that they would be able to do it, and I don't think they even identify with this. So I don't know if many of you know, there was something known as a rocket bus, which used to fly from Esplanade to Siliguri. And so Rahul, my husband, had moved there by then. And I was like, wahan pe kaise kaam hoga? I'm just setting up my work and I need to be in Calcutta. So I was like staying PG, and I did back and forth, probably 3 times a month. I would take the rocket and go up, and then get into that Jonga and go up further to Darjeeling. But I would be lucky enough to have him drop me back at least. But so from those days, again a lucky break there was while in Darjeeling. Whenever I would go there, I got a retainership with a Winterwear Hotel. So that was wonderful, it was like a learning experience for me. And then I got back and forth Cal. I found a wonderful business partner, Ritu. We started, So Decourage, of course, which is our flagship company, was there. Started in a room, went into a business center, co-working spaces, what they're called today. They were called business centers then. So I had one little desk, and then I had this first employee who joined me. And then we had Ritu joined, which was very fortunate because that's after which we really started expanding. So we got those initial lucky breaks, we got a few banks, started working for them. And then we realized that we had our own requirement of modular furniture and we were dependent on Nagpur for that. And that led to delays in our projects which we were handing over to our clients. Now when you work in the field, to make a residence, people think 1.5 years is quite all right. When you work for corporates and it's just about a couple of months they give you, and after that you've got your penalty clauses which has set in. So we set up, okay, let's just start. We started with little hand tools and small place. We were just making furniture for ourselves. And gradually we realized that that was a niche which we could scale up even more down the line as compared to the office interiors which we were working on. So Contours Furniture System was born then. Ritu and me were probably the only two women entrepreneurs who started. We were, I think, the third or the fourth factory which started in Kolkata. I think even down the line, I would say we are probably the only two women who run a factory like this in Kolkata. And now it's like a wonderful thing, I have people coming into, like when we were talking about gender bias a little while back, and I was telling Swati that frankly I have not experienced this as much. In fact, I feel the bias is towards me. So, I have people who are sitting on the fence when there's a job which we pitched for, and the minute they come into the factory, they feel that, okay, so, I've even had questions like, I think Swati asked me, is this a family business? I said, no, it's not. Is your husband also working with you? No, he isn't. So, and then they see that, these are not two women who are, outsourcing the work. We are ourselves doing it. We have a large workforce which is full of men because we are working on the factory, on the shop floor. Now, down the line, from that little hand tools, we moved into a factory space which was around 1,000 square feet. And then moved into a 5,000 square feet, and currently we are in a 12,000 square feet, and next year we're going to be in a 35,000 square feet, which is under construction at the moment. So that's the trajectory which we've seen of growth of Contours, and also a mindset change which has happened with the people. So people come in and they say, okay, sitting on the fence, they would. I don't think lost an order ever if someone has walked into our factory. Because they see that we have the skill set and we've doing the work ourselves. We've got a whole lot of people. So from that one-man organization, we now have a full-time staff strength of 60 plus, and further we are giving out work to 2, 3, 4, 500 people because interiors is a large segment. So Decourage being our main flagship, Contours becoming the second one. COVID coincidentally actually saw us build our brand even further, and the need for people to, they realize that this is something which, getting a carpenter into your house, it's going to be, probably going to take a very long time, and so this is something which is factory made, and we've got machines which are Indian, German, Chinese. We've got all kinds of large machines which we work with. And it just goes into your workplace or your home or your office, and it's just probably a matter of 2, 3, 4 days that we put it together. So it is a specialized kind of a thing. We are very, very proud to say that we've got, our client list starts from 25 years old, and they're still with us. So we pride ourselves in saying that, with the integrity and the honesty with which we've gradually built our business, is how we've still retained all these clients. So I feel that down the line, a couple of years back, we also started a different segment. So I feel that when it comes to scaling up, exactly what Swati said, that you identify the niche where there is a requirement. So you would be hearing of brands like Home Lane and Live Space if you seen them, they're around with your big Dhoni ads coming out. So I had Live Space and Home Lane call us up to say that, we will be picking up the orders and will you be the back-end manufacturer for us in Calcutta. And then I had someone else call me up a month or so later, and that's when, I felt actually it was the universe conspiring or sending out signals to us. He said that, why don't we collaborate and, start a brand on the lines of Home Lane, and let's, so eventually we christened it Home Express, and we're now actually doing budgetary homes in less than 45 days, ready to move in with all the modular furniture which we manufacture. And then we realized that, rather than doing it for someone else, why don't we do it for ourselves, which is when we set up this other firm. So it's identifying a need, of course, and then grabbing the opportunity at the right time, and then marketing it like the way we've had a friend here from Bangladesh say that you obviously have to market it. So Home Express, I must confess, is on a negative. When it comes to the books, it doesn't show the numbers correctly at the moment. We've got a long way there, but we are building that brand. And then somewhere down the line, you also feel that it's about time that you start giving back to society. So, of course, I was involved and attached to an NGO in Bombay since the past, I think, 16, 17 years. It's by the name of Family Service Center. So the link there is that I have an older son and a younger one who I have adopted from this NGO. So that's how the link came. And so I started helping them out, and I'm on their board, and we try to do as much as we can. And a couple of years back during COVID, we realized that there was a requirement which was in something like what, Ananya reaches out to, I think, millions of women and helps them out in villages. We are reaching out to probably 1,000+ artisans across 6 states, and we realized that there was a gap there. During COVID, they were not getting too many people to come in and buy, and so, they reached out to us. There is a connection, of course, how we reach these women as well, because my husband runs a MFI. He gives loans to these people. So we have set up an e-commerce venture by the name of Artisan Soul, and we are helping all these people sell their products through our platform. So these are just ways. We recently set up another company called Bargaj Foundation, where I think there was someone talking about hygiene and sanitation. So our main purpose there is to reach out to villages and help set these up. So this is the way we've just gradually scaled up over time. And the kind of lessons I have taken along the way is, of course, you do your work with integrity, and transparency is very, very important in whatever it is you do. So it's not really the financials which will, towards the end, speak. It's more about how you reached out to people, how you helped them. So, to scale up, you've got, you must, as women, I think we in any case have this inherent thing of, we run our organizations like our family. I think all of us here who are entrepreneurs would say that that's the way we do run it. So, we have these little celebrations, and you think like the way, you feel for them. So that's how they have also helped us scale up. So any time when we've said that, overtime, work till 10, work later, we want a bigger production, you have all these people turning around and helping you, which is a very, very big thing.
Yeah.
So, in all ways, we've got, I would say, for anyone to scale up, one big thing, big factor would be become a part of a networking organization. That's a very important factor. So I'm a part of, Bengal Chambers is not really for building the business, but there's something known as Business Networking International, BNI, which is actually an American organization, and it's got presence in 70+ countries, very actively involved. And I think in the last 6 years that I've been a member there, sorry? 30 seconds more. Okay, so in the last 6 years that I have been a member there, we have doubled, tripled, quadrupled our business through networking. So I think that's something which would be my, it's a big lesson which we've learned, that please do reach out, become a part of organizations, network with people, because you learn from them. So
Thank you.
that was
Thank you so much. I mean, I was tempted to break, but this was so passionate, and I know we are a little, ahead of time, as Anshuman said. We should be on time, not less, not more. But these stories are really inspiring, and thank you, all of you. I mean, there were many questions. Any questions from the audience? Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, I'm the question person. So, hearing both of you, three of you, it's been extremely inspirational, if I may say so, and introspective too. So I would like to ask that in today's environment of startups, investors coming in, looking at a certain kind of a X return on a project, and maybe from the inception in 2-3 years time, the company getting valued at few hundred crores, when the top line and rather the bottom line is shrinking or it is negative. So some of us who are in the startup phase, some of us who have been into the business, we all realize that the business is never it's like not a straight line trajectory. There is always ups and downs. There are environmental factors. Now, in your case, for decades, you have grown your business, you have scaled it up. From your perspective, now when you see companies incorporated in, say, last 5 years' time, scaled up based on some external fund infusion or whatever, and then being valued at God knows how many $1,000 and being sold, how do you relate to that? And for some of us who at times feel a little dejected and disappointed with our failures, what would be your message? Question to all of you.
So, short, I won't even be able to answer that question because, and a bandwidth which you need. So I have never really been able to get into that field of getting funding and all of that. But what you also feel that we've had a smooth sail, believe me, never. Each one of us sitting here have had journeys which have been loads of challenges where you talking about dejection, we faced it multiple times. Financially, believe me, there have been people who cheated us so many times that we probably built our kitty till here and done something and then we've come back down. So that's happened to us twice over, sometimes say once bitten, twice shy. But that's also because we've trusted people a bit too much. But I think going back, I would again trust people who I feel would be able to help me. And I hope that I do not get cheated again. But for this, maybe you are able to answer.
I'm going to quickly ask this room. How many of you know who Sabir Bhatia is? Sabir Bhatia, right. Look at your age. Do the younger ones know who Sabir Bhatia is? He's the first man who sold his own startup and he's nowhere today. He's the man who invented Hotmail. So either you love money and get saddled with money which will give you nothing. Money is what money can buy. And please, we are more than full with little bit of lunch that we ate. So remember this. But if you don't go after money. I advocate it very clearly. This whole culture is bringing the world's economy to its feet. It is the very reason of investing. I would go to the extent of calling it gambling. What is the difference between a venture capitalist, an angel investor, and a gambler at Royal Calcutta Turf Club? Please tell me, women. What is the difference? And men, whatever. No, 4-5 of you here. Everyone is gambling. So either you want to be part of it or you want to leave a legacy. I may or may not sell necessity when I hope to work for another 17 years. So I will have a golden anniversary, hopefully. But the idea is, let at least one woman rue my passing away. Let at least one woman remember me with some amount of warmth. If that doesn't happen, then what am I going to do with so much of money? This is the way the Western world looks at money. They are a consumeristic society which is paying for themselves. Why has colonialism happened? Why has hegemony happened? All of it is linked to money. Be cautious when you're dealing with money. You must ride the money you own. Never let your money ride you. So I feel good, she feels good that we are independent, our decisions are not taken, we are not tempted by money. We remain steadfast to the values we have, good, bad, or ugly. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that, Swati.
Okay, sorry, we need to
Okay,
say bye.
Michelle, thank you for joining us. Really grateful that you could come, take out time for this, hybrid mode, but technology's made it happen. So thank you very much for joining us, and bye-bye. Thank you. So, okay, on that note, I know we are stressed for time, but I'm tempted to just ask in one word or one line, one advice you have to the young entrepreneurs, one advice, all three of you.
See, very quickly I'll tell you this. Now everybody's thinking of an idea. I ask you this. It's not one line, but it's one idea. You remember what a blouse,
1 minute.
stitching, tailoring for a blouse used to cost? $100, $150, $200. Why is it costing $1,000 today? Why is nobody simply getting together a band of hundreds of tailors in Sundarbans that don't have work? Get yourself and open a home tailoring service. The one thing we don't have is tailors who come at home. And see how it works. There are hundreds of niches like this. All you need to do is just open your eyes and look around. You'll find them too. Just don't give up.
Great, thank you.
I would say that just enjoy what you do. Path is riddled with challenges, but have fun, and it's not difficult to overcome it. So just enjoy and don't let anything stop you. Whatever it is that you have dreamt of will come true. Just work hard and enjoy. The big word here is have fun.
Thank you, Anisha.
Okay, I like to say that whatever you do with your honesty and try to build your own identity as well as your product and your service and your company. And also, I also try to say that that build in long-term goals and build your own brand.
Wow, great. Thank you. So, Swati and all of you here today, thank you so much, Moniza and